Hello and welcome once again to Minds That Matter. I'm your host, James Thomas, and I'm here today with the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, Mr. Jim Ryczek. Jim, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Great. What I wanted to do for the viewers today is to have them get a sense of what the coalition is all about. First,
Sure.
to start with, what's going on, what are some of the initiatives that are happening for the coalition, and then where are we going in the future in terms of getting rid of homelessness in Rhode Island?
Sure. Well, the Coalition is an organization that was founded in 1988, so we're a little over 20 years old. And we never say that we celebrated our 20th anniversary, because the reason we exist is because homelessness exists in the state of Rhode Island, and that's not something to celebrate.
Right.
But we have been working very hard for the last 21 years to eliminate homelessness in our state, and that's part of our mission. Our vision is a state where no man, woman, or child is homeless, so we're working toward that end. We're organized in a bunch of different programs. Most people, when they think of homelessness, think of service organizations, those who do case management and deliver services to homeless individuals and families. We're the organization that does the public policy and advocacy work so that those organizations can do that work. We're also the organization that does what we call strategic communications work, which is not just media work. One of the reasons I'm here today is because we have a connection through Riverwood as a service organization, but we also offer, going out to speak in public about what we do as a state around homelessness. So it's media work, but it's also government relations work with the General Assembly and the state departments, and internal work within the state departments to understand what they have to offer homeless individuals that they're not being able to access. And finally, doing some grassroots constituent organizing, because as we know, people who experience homelessness are the best spokespeople for finding a solution and figuring out how to solve it.
Right. Now, folks that are homeless will tell me, I want a home.
Right.
That's the bottom line. I don't necessarily want to live in a shelter.
Right.
I don't want to live under a bridge abutment. I don't want to live in the woods. I want to live in my own home, and I want to have the same quality of life that everyone else has on the planet. And that seems to be the struggle for folks. That we had an executive director one time say that we're all a paycheck away from homelessness in theory. So it's not difficult to foresee if people's apartments are foreclosing, and there are a number of other issues that are going on in the state, that homelessness is in fact on the rise.
Right. Yeah, we're experiencing the highest rates of homelessness in our state's history. We have been for the past couple of years.
Can you quantify that? How many folks are homeless?
In any given month these days, we have about 1,100 to 1,200 people who come into the shelter system. Shelter and transitional housing system, those are the numbers that we count. Once folks move out of that system into permanent supportive housing or other housing situations, they don't become part of that number, but they become part of the number we do want to celebrate, the number of folks who found permanent housing. Through Riverwood, through the Housing First program, those folks have exited the number that we count and gone on to the better number. And we're of like mind with our constituents in that regard, with regard to wanting a home to be in. We don't want to build more shelters or open more shelters. We think that permanent supportive housing is more cost effective, has better outcomes for people, and it solves the problem. Shelters are, in many instances, a necessary accommodation, but it is an accommodation, not a solution to the problem.
And we have how many shelters now in Rhode Island?
Well, we have 23 core member agencies that either provide shelter, direct services, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, or a combination of all of those things. And they're broken up into family shelters, individual shelters. Some serve only men, some only women. So it really is a kind of a mishmash of different programs that are put together to meet the needs of folks who need shelter in any given night.
Okay. And then some emergency shelters have been opened up this winter, correct?
Right. Yeah, one of the challenges we faced this past late summer, early fall was figuring out with our advocacy efforts where we should devote some of our, somewhat limited time and energy, because we're a 9-person organization, so we have a big job to do with limited amount of staff. And we got a lot of advice from our constituents that They love the message we have that is pushing permanent supportive housing and moving Rhode Island from a shelter state to a housing state, and they agree with that. But on the ground, folks are going to be homeless on the street, without a place to go, given the circumstances of the economy, and especially because the weather is getting colder and there's really a life and death issue. So they urged us to solve this problem, and the more acute problem, with opening up some emergency winter shelters. So we worked very hard to push for a couple winter shelters to open. The Diocese of Providence stepped forward and offered the St. Martin de Porres Center, which is a senior center on Cranston Street in Providence. So that was able to be used as I think it's a 32-bed facility nightly. Amos House is running the facility. We have a great collaboration between Amos House, the state, and a bunch of on-the-street outreach workers who nightly go out and try and find people who need shelter and bring them to the shelter. But even with those 32 beds, we found that there were a lot more people who need an emergency shelter situation than the 32 beds can accommodate. So we kept pushing the state and others to find some solutions. And probably by the end of this week, another facility is going to open for single men at St. Matthewson Street Church that will help alleviate the problem of where folks can go on a nightly basis, at least for the winter months.
Okay. Now, I know with our Housing First program at Riverwood, we did a study after the first year and found that 91% of folks had a criminal justice history.
Right.
Probably 60% or more had substance abuse issues, and maybe more than 40 to 50% had a mental illness.
Right.
And these are folks that have been disenfranchised. Having a felonious record, you come out of prison, no one wants to have you go into a house. But with supports, with someone saying they'll answer the phone, talking to landlords and lobbying with them around the idea that we will provide supports to folks that are that were previously homeless, even if they do have a record, that we've been able to get a lot of folks housing.
Right.
But there isn't that same kind of energy out there in terms of a collective of all the mental health centers being involved and having more of a shared ownership in the fight to end homelessness. Is there any kind of strategy that we can implement as we're doing our work, but we'd like to see more people involved, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. That's always the challenge. I think the Coalition for the Homeless has many mental health centers as part of our coalition as members, but not every single one is an active member. And one of our challenges as an organization that does public policy work, advocacy work, is that very question. How do we bring more people to the table to solve problems around the common issues that we all see every day in the work that we do? We're trying to create democratic, participatory ways that different organizations can volunteer or work with us. And again, it's one of those capacity issues. We only have so many folks that can do so much work every day. But it's definitely on our radar screen as something that we're pushing to make better collaborations with the types of organizations that you're talking about. One of the more recent brainstorms we had is we're embarking on kind of the preliminary groundwork for a permanent supportive housing campaign, public awareness campaign. As the general public, when you talk about a shelter, they have an idea of what that is because they've been around for over 30 years. But when you talk about permanent supportive housing, lay people say, what is that? I don't understand. So we know that we need to educate the public about what it is and about that it serves more people with better outcomes at a cheaper cost than night-to-night shelter, so that they can get behind the idea, understand it, and start talking to their elected officials about if this makes sense, why aren't we doing more of this? So we have some funding from the United Way to get this campaign and this communications work underway. And one of the things that came to mind with us was, where in the state are there some already, infrastructure's already kind of far down the continuum where we could say maybe we can solve chronic homelessness there. in a couple years or 5 years. And so places like Woonsocket come to mind, where Northern Rhode Island Community Services is very integrated into the community, does a lot of great work up there. They're associated with substance abuse services and all sorts of different services for their population. And Woonsocket's a small city. It's more of a manageable thing than identifying Providence as the place where we could solve homelessness in 3 to 5 years. So those are the types of things that we're thinking about. It remains to be seen if we can actually do something like that. But Woonsocket, Westerly, Newport were the places that came to mind to
sort of pilot projects,
demonstration projects or something like that. That if we can do it there, why can't we do it everywhere? Would be the philosophy.
Now, there's numbers of abandoned buildings in Providence and throughout the state.
Right.
They're either being underutilized or not utilized at all. And folks have talked about, I know we've had John Joyce on the show before, and he's talked about trying to access some of those buildings to sort of to take them over and have people live in them.
Right.
In terms of trying to figure out how to get foreclosed properties and or underutilized properties to be transformed into permanent housing, are there any initiatives that are going on in that arena at this point? Or
there's federal money that came down through what everyone understands as a stimulus. The Neighborhood Stabilization Program actually was passed before the stimulus money was passed by Congress. And it's fortunate for Rhode Island that we got about $19 million to rehab formerly foreclosed properties, get them back on the market for people who earn below 50% of the median income, so people who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum. There was a Neighborhood Stabilization Program 2. Recently, HUD announced the awards, and I believe Massachusetts got some funding in New England, but no other New England state was in that round of funding. We're not happy about that. We're relaying that to HUD and our congressional delegation to figure out why that was. They, targeted supposedly the more urban metropolitan areas that had the higher rates of foreclosure, but Rhode Island has been up there in the foreclosure rates. And the things that John and other advocates have thought about around the foreclosed properties and abandoned properties are great ideas. The challenge is that even though we've had a lot of foreclosures in this state, we haven't seen prices drop as much as other states have. There's still a lot of speculation going on out there. There are still enough people willing to buy up for profit foreclosed properties or abandoned properties and quickly flip them, rehab them, and sell them again. And that has caused a problem for us in the housing industry, affordable housing industry, because we look to our sister organizations in the Community Development Corporation world, because they're the nonprofits that acquire these properties and want to sell them or rent them to people who are at very, very low incomes. They don't make a profit on this. They're looking just to break even on the deal because it's their mission.
Right.
But a lot of folks who want to make a profit have been able to buy them up from underneath the CDCs. And the funding for the CDCs, they rely on nonprofit solutions like the Neighborhood Opportunities Program, the Affordable Housing Bond that was passed by the voters here in Rhode Island in 2006. NOP we've had to fight to keep it in the state budget for the past 3 years. If the governor doesn't put it in his budget again this year, which we've urged him to, and we hope he will. We'll again have to fight for the General Assembly to put it back, which is always a harder fight than if it's already there to begin with. And the $50 million affordable housing bond that was passed by the voters we're in their last year of that bond, so we're not going to have that fund looking forward to 2011 to start or to keep building the types of housing that very, very low income people need. So that's hamstringed us a little bit as well.
Okay, but that is something that is still on the burner in terms of trying to get it enacted.
No one thinks that another housing bond should go on the ballot in 2010. I mean, people are looking, to make ends meet in Rhode Island these days, and so we don't think that would be politically tenable. But there are other ways that we could figure out a permanent funding stream through some sort of mechanism through the General Assembly, through legislation, and those are the types of things we'd like to investigate and figure out.
Okay. With the Housing First philosophy, again, one of the drawbacks of many of the folks that are homeless is that they have some kind of stigma attached to them, whether it be, again, criminal justice issues, substance issues, mental health issues. What I like about the Housing First concept is that those things are moot. All you need to do is abide by the lease and pay your rent, and you get someplace to live. My concern with some other sort of brothers and sisters in arms is that sometimes they'll put some kind of expectation on a person that says that you either have to get psych stable or abstinent or clear up your criminal justice record, then we'll look at providing you housing. When we've been very, very successful in just getting people housing and then working on all that stuff afterwards. Is there a way to sort of energize folks around the Housing First concept? I know it's a national phenomenon, and it's been researched all over the country, and it's very successful. But yet it hasn't been sort of embraced by some folks in Rhode Island. What could Riverwood do, and or can we do as sort of advocates for working with folks that are homeless to sort of spread the news about Housing First and the effectiveness of it?
Well, I think the things that are working for the Housing First philosophy here in the state are numerous. One is that the United Way came to the table and kind of challenged the state to establish this Housing First program. So the state has allocated $300,000 a year for Housing First, and has steadily done that, even in this economic decline. That has never been, so far, knock on wood, funding that has been at risk. In fact, when 2 years ago the Coalition wanted to expand that funding to $500,000, and it was the first year of the budget shortfalls in the General Assembly, and we were told really quickly by the finance chairs, if there's any additional money attached, see you later. So we at least figured that we could get changed the Housing Resources Commission law that established the Housing Resources Commission to have the Housing First program embedded in law so that we would have to have one in the state of Rhode Island. So the language read, we shall have a Housing First program in the state. That language didn't fly. We got we may have a housing, but anyone who knows legislative processes knows that it's an incremental step process. So I think we've done quite well to at least establish that Housing First is something that we need to have in the state, that's here to stay, that has great outcomes. We have 2 years of evaluation now that we're touting all the time to say, if it saves money, has better outcomes for people, and they're stable, why wouldn't we replicate this or do more of it? With regard to other programs that have different philosophies, we represent them as well. And what we say is, there are programs that crop up that to serve certain populations within the population of homeless people. And so we do need a drug-free program, for instance, like Amos House, who is willing and does very well at serving folks who want to be clean and sober and in the recovery model. But we're also very clear to say we need enough options based on the need and the population of homeless people that there is one of those options that they are comfortable with in our system.
Available.
Right, available. So that they can choose Housing First, drug-free recovery, or some combination of the two that they're comfortable with. And right now, I can't say that that's the case. We have enough programs that have those types of philosophies, but we don't have enough spaces in each of them that everyone who's homeless can choose the one that best meets their needs. So that's what we're working for at the Coalition, to expand everything to have that available for them.
When I first thought about Housing First as a concept for Rhode Island, my dream was that it would be in every one of the mental health centers, and some other nonprofits that wanted to be involved to take up the charge. And as yet, that hasn't happened. But it is a good point that a continuum of care, I think, is essential in any kind of recovery program. And we're talking about the recovery from being homeless to having permanent housing, and or to, in fact, to have a home. So.
And I think the Permanent Supportive Housing campaign that we're going to be waging to educate the general public will go a long way towards helping providers figure out where do they want to be in this. If the public is behind a solution and politicians start to get behind a solution, it's a no-brainer to know that resources will be dedicated to that solution.
Right.
So my philosophy has always been where the funding leads, practitioners will follow and understand better. And if they don't, they're not going to be in business into the future. And we want people to be in business around the solution. But the other thing it's going to hopefully foment is collaborations among organizations that have pieces of the pie that they do well, that they can work with others. I mean, we're really trying to encourage more and more collaboration and innovative ideas around the issue of solving homelessness in the state. So hopefully that'll happen.
Our charge too is to get folks, if they were disenfranchised at a local mental health center and ended up becoming homeless, we'll work with them and then try to get them to re-engage with that center if at all possible. Right. So our mission is actually to work our way out of business, keep people housed, but also utilize without a better word, the overhead of the community to help them to get their needs met. And many folks just want to stay with us because they like us, but other people do move out, move back, go to another part of the state, and we refer them to the local mental health or substance abuse providers in that area to help them to get their needs met. So it's not that everybody wants to stay housed in Providence, but maybe they came from Greenville, or maybe they came from Woonsocket, or maybe they came from Westerly. And they eventually want to move back into that area when time and space and Section 8 housing allows.
Right. I mean, the Food and Shelter Board does a report every year on, and it's a time series that's been going on for almost 20 years, on who are the folks coming into the homeless system. What are their barriers? What has caused them to become homeless? And not every year, but the last full year that was reported on. We look at where you came from. What city or town was your last city or town of residence? And the last report, every single one of our 39 cities and town had somebody who came from that town into the homeless system. And so, people in Barrington or Bristol or some of our more South Kingstown, may not, Charlestown. I mean, some of our more affluent communities may not know that a homeless person or family actually became homeless while they lived in that city or town. So it is a statewide issue. Right.
Now, on your team of 9 that works with the coalition, how many folks are up at the State House lobbying and advocating for your initiatives?
It depends on the day, but we have a collaboration not only with other we have a collaboration with other organizations. So the Housing Action Coalition, we all live in this same office space now. We moved there in October. So the Housing Action Coalition is there, the Housing Network of Rhode Island is there, and the Corporation for Supportive Housing is there. So we have all of us together. And we actually don't do our direct lobbying. The Housing Action Coalition does it for us. Okay. We do the strategic communications work for all of us. And Michelle Brophy from the Corporation for Supportive Housing, who is an expert at the internal systems work in the state departments, she does that piece. So we meet once monthly. We call we've been dubbed the 4-H Club by one of our colleagues. So, but we meet to collaborate and make sure that we are all on the same page with all the work that we're doing. But we know that it takes many more people than just the folks we have in our one agency to do this type of work. So we're trying to build this kind of wall-less organization where we all do have our own boards, we all have our own budgets, and we all are separate, 501c3s. But the work is about the work. The work is not about the budget and all that type of stuff. So we try our best to do that.
Any legislators that we can identify that are particularly good advocates for ending homelessness up at the State House?
Well,
can you name names? Or
Okay.
Well,
rest in peace, Tom Slater was one of our biggest advocates up at the State House on the House side. Gordon Fox has been the prime sponsor of the Neighborhood Opportunities Program for the last several years.
What area is he from?
He's from Providence and is actually majority leader in the House. And Leader Murphy has, the Speaker Murphy has tapped him as his choice to replace him
Oh.
once he leaves. So that remains to be seen. There's always, going to be a number of people who are interested in the speakership. On the Senate side, Senator Josh Miller from Cranston has been a very, very big supporter of all of our issues. Rhoda Perry from Providence has been a great supporter. And on the House side, David Siegel has been very interested, Edie Agello in some of our issues. Ed Pacheco from Burrillville has been very interested. I mean, there's no end of folks who we work with who really get what we're trying to do. And we're trying to help them help their colleagues understand. I would say that, whenever I've talked to legislators, they really do understand what we're trying to do. I sympathize with them that they have multiple constituencies to answer to and a very hard job to do. I mean, they're trying to balance a budget. By law, they have to do it and figure out, what resources, scarce resources, do we put in, with all these needs that we have. But we try to appeal to their sense of, dignity and respect for the human condition. We're talking about folks who are in the most acute circumstances they can be in our society. There's not much lower you can get than losing everything you have and your home. So we argue that we really need to take care of that as our ethical responsibility in this state.
As we move forward, what are some initiatives and dreams and goals and aspirations do we have to end homelessness? What's the top dog in terms of what we need to do?
Well, keeping the Neighborhood Opportunities Program, it's built well over 1,000 units of housing for very low-income people. Keeping that intact is one thing that we need to make sure we do. Making sure that we don't lose any ground in funding across the state, because we've had level funding for the last number of years, but by definition the numbers have gone up, so we've actually decreased our ability to do what we want to do. We have several things that are coming down the pike from the federal government. The National Trust Fund, Housing Trust Fund, has been passed by the Congress. Now we're waiting for it to be what's called capitalized, the actual endowment that needs to go in order to generate the money to then build housing. If I'm correct in my conversations with my fellow advocates, I think in the first round next year, 2011, we're due to get about $4 million. That could go as high as $40 million if it's capitalized the way that the national advocates would like it to be capitalized. So, keeping our finger on the national pulse is something that we also do to make sure that we're getting our fair share.
Well, that was a perfect time to stop, because we now have to stop. But thank you very much for being with us today on Minds That Matter.
It was great to be here. Thanks,
Great.
Jim.
Thanks, you're welcome.